Hello one and all, and welcome to Wildlife Watch, where I have to stop and admire this fantastic tree here. This is a wild plum tree, which is actually an edible species. The plums are not as big as a lot of the ones you would buy in a shop, but I can assure you they are equally, if not more, tasty. And this is the blossom on that tree. Now, if you were to come here about a week ago, most of these sticks were almost completely bare, but now you can see the flowers and shoots have emerged. There's been a couple of dry sunny days and it's just literally brought this out in full bloom. And look at that. Just look at the size of it. An absolute explosion of bright colour against, on the whole, what is still very autumnal and winter looking sticks around us. So today's episode is a special. We are going to be looking at other signs of spring. Such an exciting time of year, such a lot going on, with a particular focus on some of the birds which are setting up their nesting habitats for the season ahead. Enjoy. Don't have to go very far at all to see the first habitat which we're going to stop and study. These are brambles. Now, we know I have a love-hate relationship with brambles. They are a cluster rooted, they grow very dense, they knot and kind of tangle around each other. And in terms of giving room for other things to grow, they give very little. However, we do leave sections of brambles, and that's because they're a perfect habitat for certain species. A lot of wood mice will use this for cover to stop predators being able to get them as they skulk along the ground, as other small mammals might also use this. Also, one of our popular species in our woodlands, long-tailed tits, will use this for their nests. They like getting in among the thick shrub with the thorns that protect it, and we already know, if we sit and watch this particular area right here, that they are going in with feathers and small twigs to line the nest which they are currently building right now, which is the exact reason this will stay here. Now, if we think if this was being managed as a sort of garden or ornament hedgerow, this stuff will be the first to come out, but we recognise that we need to give value to our wildlife, and to do that we need a range of habitats, and this is just one habitat that we will preserve alongside enhancing as many others as we can. It's an interesting time of year for spotting nests because a lot of the foliage isn't on the trees, which would probably hide them away. So what we're really looking at, it's maybe the early stages of nesting, or maybe some of the nests which are possibly left over from last year, which could, in all essence, be reused. Now, what we can see at the top of these trees, it is very difficult to make out, is the nests of some of our more predatory species, magpies, crows, members of the corvid family, even some of our raptors, including our buzzards, will like high, tall trees where they can get a particularly high vantage point. They are, in the grand scheme of things, quite high up the food chain, and so they don't seem to be as bothered by sort of anything above them to give them sort of any sort of protection. They like to sort of like be high up, looking down on the rest of the world with their young. So looking up at the trees, we can see quite clearly that the ball of sticks there, that is a corvid nest. Looking at the shape of it, I would say it's a magpie nest. Now, the reason it is identified as a magpie nest is magpies not only build a nest with a base, but they also, with sticks, almost do like a ball which kind of completely surrounds the nest, whether that is to kind of protect the young. And I say protect because I doubt it gives that much protection from rain and sort of serious elements. However, it will stop them being as vulnerable to rolling out from the great height at the tops of those tall trees there. As you can see, they are situated very high up. Other birds which are expected to nest around here, there's very little evidence of the moment, but we would expect that perhaps corvids tend to sort of nest in communities, and so it's not impossible that if that is one of the first nests to be built this season, that others will be built fairly close by. So we'll keep an eye out for that as the spring season progresses. Let's talk ivy. It is a species which can be divisive when it comes to woodland management. I have worked with coppice managers and people who sort of maintain woodlands, and they will routinely remove ivy from trees as it grows around the trunks and further up to the canopy. There are particular reasons we don't religiously remove ivy. Yes, it does add weight to the tree, and yes, it does use the tree as a frame for which it climbs up. However, if you look at the way that it grows, the nesting habitat which that provides to a number of our songbird and sort of native species is numerous, and there are a number of species which will use this and gravitate towards this even because of its evergreen cover and the way that it is gives a perfect place to start building smaller nest structures. So for that reason, ivy is definitely something we should learn to love if you can't completely love it already. We talk of spring nesting habitats and we all instantly assume that we were talking about birds, but actually there's other species to consider. If we come down to this water here, it's very difficult for me to show you this without getting my fingers and hands wet. So in here, see if we can just show you a little bit of it. Frog spawn. Let's be honest, this looks like either an old vehicle track or some naturally sort of created puddle even. It's far from the sort of lakes and open waters, and we automatically, before we kind of know any better, assume that frogs would lay their eggs in a pond when there's a big pond like Holmer Lake, which is not far from here. But there's a reason that they don't. The huge ponds come with the added risk of huge predators, and a frog does not want that for its young. It will naturally seek out smaller sort of puddle areas in the hope that there will be no sort of major predators here that will eat the young before they get a chance to turn into adults. Now, there is an added risk with that. This particular area is one that we visited just a couple of years ago, and monitoring the young, it very, very quickly dried out, this puddle, and unfortunately not many of the young made it that year. And so there is an inherent risk with this survival strategy. Sometimes it can massively backfire, but this is very typically where I am more likely to find frog spawn if I was to try and find it in places like this, ditches, smaller waterways, and if I was to try and search for it in the lake itself, where if there was frog spawn at all, it would be very thick in sort of reed beds where main predators and main fish wouldn't be able to access it. So there we go, nesting habitat right there for our frog and amphibian species. Now, when it comes to nesting habitats, blue tits are probably one of the most interesting species that you will find nesting in the local area. And the simple reason for that is they will nest pretty much anywhere. We have had blue tits which we have known to nest in some of our lampposts. We have known them to nest in cracks in walls and in buildings. And here, in this footage captured by our volunteer Barry Weeder, you can see this one scoping out a crack in a dead tree. So you can expect to find blue tit nests pretty much all over the place, and they will basically nowhere is off limits. And so if you've got any interesting sort of quirky spots around your house and gardens that a nest could be made inside, this is probably the main species that I would think is most likely to move into that. Now, the final note on our nesting habitat has to go to our swans. There's been much debate about whether our swans were a breeding pair and whether they will be nesting this year, but early indications are, due to some of the courtship behaviour which has been witnessed by some of our visitors to the site, and this photograph by our regular volunteer Barry, they could be a breeding pair and they could be about to build a nest. And so we are watching that situation very closely, and we'd be very interested to hear any of your sightings if you're out and about and you see any nesting or pairing behaviour by the swans which are currently occupying our waters. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all from me for this week's bulletin. Thank you very much if you've tuned in. Please do share with anyone that you feel would like to see this, particularly if those people are currently forced to stay inside because of travel restrictions, or they've had to self-isolate, because we want to bring the wildlife from us to them. Other than that, guys, stay safe, stay well, be kind to each other, and we look forward to posting out another update next week. Thank you for tuning in. Speak soon.